And so we come to the PlayStation's first two Mahjong games. Hooray! It was only a matter of time, really. Mahjong simulators were already pretty popular on Japanese consoles and PCs, but the genre exploded in the mid-90s with the release of the PlayStation and Sega Saturn. Publishers really couldn't wait to start releasing these things, since two different Mahjong games launched alongside the PlayStation in Japan in 1994, one published by Electronic Arts, and the other from Sunsoft. We'll look at Mahjong Goku Tenjiku from Electronic Arts first. Mahjong Goku Tenjiku is developed by Chat Noir, a Japanese studio that specialized in, well, Mahjong games. Chat Noir's catalog spans multiple console generations, going as far back as the MSX home computer and extending through the Famicom Disk System, Super Famicom, Sega Saturn, and even the PlayStation 2. Mahjong Goku Tenjiku is actually part of a long-running series from Chat Noir. It kicked off in 1986 with Professional Mahjong Goku for consoles and home computers in Japan. A sequel, Mahjong Goku Special, hit the PC Engine in 1990. The game we're looking at today is actually the third entry in the series. Mahjong Goku Tenjiku first appeared on the 3DO Interactive Multiplayer in June of 1994, and a port for the Super Famicom shipped a few months later. Like Tama from a few episodes ago, Mahjong Goku Tenjiku was a launch title for the Sega Saturn in Japan, and it's also one of the very few games released for the PCFX, NEC's short-lived successor console to the PC Engine, or TurboGrafx-16. Basically, if you owned a Japanese console in 1994, there was a good chance you could play Mahjong Goku Tenjiku on it. The thing is, there isn't much that differentiates these ports. For instance, here's the PlayStation version of Mahjong Goku Tenjiku. And now here's the Super Famicom port. Can you tell the difference? They look pretty much identical. I guess the PlayStation version has higher quality voice clips, and the AI takes a little bit longer to make its moves on the Super Famicom, but the PlayStation's hardware isn't exactly being pushed to its limits here. The gameplay isn't anything special either. I mean, first of all, it's Mahjong. To say that this kind of thing has been done before on consoles is an understatement. I won't go into detail about how the game is played, but basically each player takes turns drawing and discarding tiles in hopes of building a winning hand. The competitive aspect involves claiming your opponent's tiles when they discard them in order to fill out your hand. Yup, endless excitement. I gotta say, even as far as Mahjong sims go, this is some pretty basic stuff. There's a Journey to the West theme going on here, but there's very little in the way of story or progression. It's basically just a series of back-to-back Mahjong matches. This kind of thing seems downright lazy compared to arcade Mahjong games of the late 80s and early 90s, which made up for their straightforward gameplay with bizarre theming and generally solid presentation quality. Also, nudity. Lots of it. If I was a Mahjong snob, I'd probably say something like, "This falls far short of the standards set by Nichibutsu's Mahjong the Lady Hunter." Obviously. Okay, so there's one thing I like about Mahjong Goku Tenjiku. If you play in free mode, you get to pick your opponents, and the game will automatically highlight a suggested tile to discard when it's your turn. This might be a good way to familiarize yourself with the game if you're a beginner. Otherwise, you probably won't find much of interest here. Let's move on to the second PlayStation Mahjong game released on December 9th, 1994. This one's published by Sunsoft, so maybe it'll be better. Mahjong Station Mazin is developed by Chat Noir, a Japanese studio that specialized in... Wait a minute. Seriously? So let me get this straight here. Two Mahjong games launched alongside the PlayStation in Japan, from different publishers, but they're credited to the same developer? How does that even happen? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. First, let's talk a little bit about Sunsoft. If you grew up with a Nintendo Entertainment System in the 80s, you may know Sunsoft as the creator of popular games like Batman, Blaster Master, and Super Spy Hunter. These games are rich in graphical detail and in mechanical depth, and they're generally regarded as classics of the era. Once the 16-bit consoles rolled around, Sunsoft kinda lost its edge. Several key members of its Japanese staff, including Blaster Master director Koichi Kitazumi, left the company to form Nipponichi Software. Meanwhile, Sunsoft's North American branch started producing things like mascot platformers, Looney Tunes licensed games, and Amiga ports from Western developers. Its games were still generally decent, but overall Sunsoft's 16-bit catalog is less memorable and inspired than its 8-bit stuff. Mahjong Station Mazin arrived at a key point in Sunsoft's history. Its controlling company, Sun Corporation, had just lost a ton of money on a golf course investment in Palm Springs, leading to a major corporate restructuring in February of 1995. As a result, Sunsoft's North American branch closed up immediately, leaving Acclaim to pick up and publish the remaining games it had in development at the time. Though it did eventually resume overseas publishing in the late 90s, Sunsoft basically sat out the first few years of the 32-bit era in North America. In the meantime, it continued to release games in Japan. Games like this one, for instance. So let's get to it. After Mahjong Goku Tenjiku, I don't exactly have much in the way of expectations here. We'll pick virtual mode, start up a match, and oh my god! No. Why is this happening? So it turns out that virtual mode renders Mahjong matches in full 3D. The table is 3D, the tiles are 3D, and your opponents are 3D polygonal models. The game's 3D characters were its big selling point, apparently, since Sunsoft included a whole bunch of them and gave them individual profiles in the manual. These aren't your everyday run-of-the-mill Mahjong addicts either. You can face off against a cowboy, a vampire, a samurai, even a robot. All these characters have their own unique animations and voice clips, and as I'm sure you've noticed by now, they're huge! The game's presented from a low-angle, first-person perspective, almost like your chin is resting on the table while the camera dramatically zooms in on whoever's turn it is. It's actually kind of frightening. Everyone's always yelling and waving their arms around. It feels like a fistfight's gonna break out. The problem is that as much fun as virtual mode is to look at, it's not very practical. You're stuck waiting 30 seconds or more between turns while your opponents scream at each other, which is very entertaining, don't get me wrong, but it makes for a very slow game of Mahjong. It's especially frustrating when you hit an unlucky streak, leading to a ton of downtime as you wait to finish out games that you're just gonna lose anyway. Fortunately, Mahjong Station Mazin includes a standard mode for you traditionalists. Here, your opponents don't animate or speak, they're not even drawn on screen. The tiles are nicely shaded, and they're larger and more detailed than what we saw in Mahjong Goku Tenjiku. The gameplay also unfolds pretty quickly, and you can finish an entire game in the time it takes you to complete 3 or 4 turns in virtual mode. It's simple. It works. It's Mahjong. So, virtual mode may be impractical, but it goes a long way in giving Mahjong Station Mazin a sense of identity that other Mahjong games lack. Other games like Mahjong Goku Tenjiku, for instance. So how or why did Chat Noir apparently develop 2 different Mahjong games for the PlayStation at launch? Well, in addition to developing its own games internally, Chat Noir also licensed out its Mahjong AI to other developers and publishers. This is why Chat Noir is often given developer credit for games that it otherwise had no hand in creating. Given the gulf in quality between the 2 games, I'm willing to bet that Mahjong Station Mazin was subcontracted to another development team, which then used Chat Noir's licensed AI as a foundation. It's an unusual situation, for sure, but it's unlikely that Chat Noir intended to screw over either one of its publishers at the time. Sunsoft had previously teamed up with Chat Noir in 1990 to produce Telltale Mahjong, which was one of the rare games that used the Sega Mega Drive's modem peripheral for online play. Sunsoft even published Mahjong Goku Special for the PC Engine in Japan, and it continued to license Chat Noir's engine in the years afterward for table game compilations like the Game no Tatsujin series. While it might be the case that Sunsoft was not informed that a PlayStation port of Mahjong Goku Tenjiku was in the works, it's more likely that they were aware of the possibility and didn't consider it to be a problem. Like I said before, Mahjong games were riding a wave of popularity in Japanese arcades in the early 90s, and you'd see several different console Mahjong games competing on store shelves at pretty much any given point in the previous hardware generation. I'd assume there's a pretty low baseline for production cost when it comes to Mahjong games, especially, when you can just license another company's AI. If you could put a product on shelves, you were guaranteed at least some sort of return on your investment. This kind of philosophy is what led to the literally hundreds of Mahjong games released for the PlayStation and Sega Saturn in the years afterward. But back in the primitive era of 1994, a mere 25% of the PlayStation's Japanese launch lineup consisted of Mahjong games. The better of the pair is, obviously, Mahjong Station Majin, with its terrifying first-person battles against Mahjong giants. I'm totally gonna see that robot in my nightmares, I just know it. Next time, we'll finish up our look at the PlayStation's launch in Japan with Crime Crackers, the system's first ever first-person shooter. Just as an advance warning here, it's anime as heck. If you enjoy this series, you can back us on Patreon to see new episodes early, and you can follow us on Twitter where we share all sorts of fun stuff from the 32-bit era and beyond. See ya!